I welcome you all here for our last meeting of the year, and a particular welcome to our Zoomers. Also a welcome to our Mungai Jadine. It's her second meeting today, as well as Councillor Mark, who is running late. So the meeting's underway. I'll call for apologies, and I will read the list of apologies that I have out. Please correct me if I'm missing anybody. Absence from Councillor Kesh and Councillor Angela. Councillor Hamilton for lateness. Councillor Mark Donovan for lateness. Mayor Paula for lateness. Thank you. Those in favour?
Rob.
Sorry.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
If we go past 1, then I may need to leave early, so, or around there.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. We'll note that.
Potential early departure.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Any other apologies? Moved by Mark, seconded by Mark B. Seconded by Councillor Ewan. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. The agenda has been circulated. I will move the agenda. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Mark. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No, there are none. Public forum. We have one speaker in the public forum today, and that's Roger Stratford, and we're just letting him in. He's now in. Good morning, Roger. Hello, Roger. Just waiting for him to come through. Hello, Roger. There he is. Good morning, Roger. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Can you message him?
Can you hear us, Roger?
He can't, so I don't think he can hear us, so we're just going to message him. Can you hear us, Roger? He can't hear us, so we're just going to message him to turn his microphone on. So do we want to just move to the minutes of the meeting and then come back to it?
Okay,
yeah.
All right. We've got a technical difficulty here, so we'll work on that. And while we're waiting, while we're working on that, we'll come back to the public forum. Roger's our only speaker. So let's move on to item 5, which is a confirmation of the Finance Committee open minutes of the 5th of October. Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Do I have a seconder as to accuracy? Thank you, Councillor Maxine. Are there any matters arising from those minutes that you wish to speak to?
I think it's just a matter of the staff action regarding the Three Waters positive variance, and I think understand that Tracy was going to email a response to members. Do you know if that's happened yet, Becca?
Is this the one concerning the favourable variance in stormwater?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she's not emailed anything yet. I do believe she did respond to that staff action back a couple of days after the October meeting.
Okay.
So hopefully we can just find that and republish it. It seems, yeah.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
all, Chair.
Thank you. And also the second item was around the vested assets graph and the future financial performance and strategy reports, and that's included in. Oh, and Tracy's report. Okay, we'll follow that up when Tracy speaks to her report a little later. Thank you. All right, so those in favour that the minutes represent a true and correct record, please say aye. Aye. Hands up in Zoom land. Against? Yep.
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. we having success with Roger now? Oh, we'll just wait a moment and see if... Great. Yes, can you hear us, Roger? Where's he gone? He's on mute now. You're on mute, Roger. Yep.
Yes, I'm ready to begin now.
Oh, great. Thanks, Roger. Welcome to the public forum of the Finance Committee. You know the drill pretty well, 5 minutes, and the topic that you are wishing to make submissions on, item 9, around office goods and the stationery contract renewal. So the floor is yours.
Maureen, Rob, thank you very much for agreeing to allow my presentation this morning. I just wanted to make a few comments regarding I see your averages, you're using the mean to describe the cost of the office goods and stationery costs per year, and it would be a good idea to use the median instead. I think that alternatives to the renewal of the contract should be more seriously considered, as there is a moral hazard involved in bulk purchasing in terms of economies of scale, and we need to take absolute care, as described in your report this morning, with the ratepayers' money, to ensure that we don't, as a council, encounter or engineer avoidable cost increases. So care with economies of scale and so on, and in terms of stationery, yes, well, you in the normal course of business stationery, but normal course of business has been redefined. I remember when I first came here to Hamilton, we had to use in classes at school. We used fountain pens. We would have to fill the pen up with ink manually in class rather than using biro. So technology is constantly improving, and obviously now you have filters and so on. I'll leave it there for now, but if there are any burning questions that any of our fellow councillors have, quite happy to clarify what I'm trying to my position I'm with you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Roger. I'm looking around to see if there are any questions from councillors. Not seeing any, but thank you for your submission this morning, Roger. Some of the areas that you have that you've touched on in your submission will be covered in later reports. Certainly, digitalisation is one of the areas that council is very, very active in looking at in terms of our cost saving and efficiency within the organisation, and that will be covered in the cost savings report, item 10 on the agenda, and some of the other questions that you've raised in terms of the item 9. I'm sure we'll be asking staff presenting that to make comments on what we are doing in that space with the renewal of that contract. So thank you for your...
Really reassuring.
So thanks for your participation this morning. You're welcome to stay on and listen to the YouTube feed of the meeting.
Rightio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a Merry Christmas, Roger.
Oh yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so public forum, we have no further speakers in the public forum today. We'll move on now to item 6, which is the Chair's report. And just by way of background, I wrote this Chair's report on the basis that we were expecting to have an initial annual plan workshop last week, which has been deferred till February. I did support that deferral. So I'm not using that as an excuse for why the report might have been written the way that it was. I also referred to what was then a new strain of the virus called Omicron, which I had to look up in the newspaper to make sure that I'd spelt it right. It was so new 10 days ago, and yet this strain appears to be sweeping the world and in such a short time. So some of the matters I've raised will be addressed in today's meeting, particularly COVID costs and the impact of inflation over the forthcoming period, which is which is partly COVID related, but also related to an increasing shortage of labour resource and materials to complete some of our contracts. So I've attached to the report quite a detailed report for the sector undertaken by Burl, and that gives a little bit of oversight. I think that while we've been talking around the table in discussions of a 6% inflation rate for next year, that's a CPI rate, typically in our own sector with a high dependence on petrochemical products in roading and a good deal of the work that we do, our inflation factor might be higher than the 6%, and that has been the case in earlier years where inflation has been higher than it certainly has been in the last few years. So that's my Chair's report. Apart from opening it up for discussion, also wishing everybody a joyous break, and thanks to the work that's been done by this committee, as well as a very, very hard-working and dedicated staff team. So, questions, and I just find myself back on here in the right place. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Rob. And I reciprocate your Christmas greetings. Thank you for your work too. And thank you for bringing up the huge inflationary pressures we're about to hit, and the labour costs as well, and the labour strains we're going to hit. And I just wanted to ask the GM, we're coming into an annual plan. And the Chair made a very good point that the shopping list, as normal, starts to pile up about now before an annual plan. Are we in for a shock being able to pay for what we've already budgeted for in the LTP? I don't know, this gives us a slight hint, but in your mind, have we catered enough for our next few years' capital projects in particular?
The team's still finalising the numbers and doing some work. I haven't seen anything that's been shocking, although we know that there is pressure, cost pressure, headwinds that we're moving into.
Yeah.
The team are reviewing the capital program just to make sure that they've got that right in terms of the inflationary pressures on our costs.
Yeah, well, we'll just one alone, like for example, the zoo last finance meeting, we had to whack in another $500,000 for that very reason. So, we've got some really capital intensive projects coming up.
Yeah, so the kids, the staff are really alert to this topic and are doing a whole lot of work to make sure that when we do have the briefing in the new year that we can bring the full picture.
Could you let us know as early as you possibly can? Because
on the 24th?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Councillor Mark, we will. Yep.
Yeah, all right, okay, thank you. So, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mark. Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rob. Look, I thought your report was very good. Again, it sends a cautionary signal. I guess I'm particularly interested in the fact that due to COVID and in theory lack of labour and material, on one hand our projected levels of debt are slightly less than we had thought because we've done less. I guess similar to Mark, because Mark actually asked a number of the questions I was going to ask, so I'm just trying to really drill in and get a better feel. But my feeling is at 6%, and I think it's going to be more likely 8% inflation in real terms with supply channel challenges. With the capital projects of 380 odd million, we could be coming into what would be a significant storm. And I guess you've already said that you don't have enough information to tell us now, but my feeling is this could be serious.
Yeah, and that's why the team are really putting a lot of time and energy into making sure their costings and their LTP have enough contingency for what we're talking about. If they don't, we'll certainly bring that to the elected members for discussion. You know, when we talk about our debt to revenue ratio, the simple way we have to respond if we are finding that our cost pressures are too large is to review our capital program and see what are we going to defer to make sure that we stay within our headroom. So those are the things that we're looking at now and looking to bring to elected members early in the new year. Bearing in mind, one thing to remember is that we go by the local government cost index, not CPI. CPI is general inflation for consumers in terms of a general basket of goods, but what we do in local government is get information on the local government cost index, and what that does is it takes into account the materials and items that we would normally purchase to deliver on our work program. So that's why we use BEAL, because it's quite complex, and the team are just reviewing those numbers now.
Right, but the reality is, at the end of the day, we have to pay real costs, and the indications are they're going to be significantly more than we had projected.
That is what the initial...
Compounded by the fact that we have failed to deliver a number of projects we thought we would deliver for the same inflationary pressures, you know, supply chain, labour issues. So I'm assuming, in fact, when we go into the annual plan, we will already be in the millions of dollars more financially restricted than we would have been otherwise.
That's probable. What we will do, though, is not just bring a problem. We'll do a full review of the capital program and come with opportunities to address that as well. So
great. And my final question, will that include a strategy to basically revisit obviously all projects, but particularly projects that we haven't been able to deliver, that we thought we would deliver? Is it your recommendation we complete those before we even consider new spend?
It would be our view that anything we've started we want to finish, and that we need to prioritise our principles around safety and in terms of dealing with the more important pressures that council is facing before we would, if you like, spend dollars on discretionary items that didn't meet those high risk areas or high need areas. So that's the kind of filter that the team are using.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ewan. Councillor Maxine.
Thank you, Chair, for your report and for highlighting those significant issues that we'll be needing to keep an eye on into 2022 and as we get into our deliberations. Again, back to the labour force and issues that we're going to be facing around there. During the long-term plan, David, there was a proposal to take on some interns, and that number was reduced to fit within our budget. Is that something that might need to be reviewed in light of the shortage, I guess, of talent that might be not just now but into 22 and 23?
We can certainly bring back the information that we first recommended before we trimmed. Certainly in terms of talent and resources to support council or enable council to be able to deliver on its work programs, we're going to need to think laterally about how we can attract great talent, and all councils are in the same boat. In fact, all businesses are in the same boat at the moment. So we'll certainly happy to bring back that the internship, because I do believe that there's a lot of value in that in terms of breeding our own as opposed to looking outside.
Great, thank you for that. And you'll present that through the deliberations in...
Oh, happy to bring it back to the briefing to start with, and then just go through there.
Great, thank you for that. And the second part of that, probably more to Chris Allen, with regard to being able to deliver on the projects that we have coming up the pipeline, some of the strategies in order to be able to ensure that we've got resourcing in terms of materials to complete the works. One of the strategies is to get that ordering in early stockpile or what have you. Have we made any provisions for that at this stage?
Yeah, look, just to add to the general discussion, look, this is a big issue, so Councillor Ewan is quite right, and it's escalating every day. Like every day you're reading more about this issue, and it's continuing to escalate. Just in terms of a comment on that previous discussion, and Ian and Chris will cover it in their reports, that we do have a couple of significant issues that we'll be bringing to your attention. And it's around inflation. We've got 2 multi-year contracts that have escalation clauses in them. So it's a formulaic response to increasing inflation, and when you're plugging in the indices contractually to those, it results in pretty significant contract variations. One you'll hear about today for Cobham Wairere. The one that you'll hear about, which is quite significant, it's in the annual plan for the Peacocks project. So we are building that into the annual plan process, Councillor Ewan, so making allowance in that and giving consideration across the board. In terms of what techniques we're deploying, Councillor Maxine, you're quite right, like materials and early ordering of materials is a really good strategy at the moment. Number one, for just the supply. There's a real shortage of materials out there. I heard the other day you just can't buy 6x2 timber anymore, and so builders are having to use 4x2 and having more piles in place because they just can't get 6x2. So it's got impacts right across the industry. I think we're doing it really well in some of our projects, like Peacocks, for instance, where a lot of the materials on that have been pre-ordered and pre-bought and pre-purchased. That's a continuing exercise for them all the way through. So every project now, we're putting it through what we call a gateway review before we let the contract, just to make sure we've thought about the project and how it might roll out and what the key issues are, and are there opportunities to pre-order materials up front. One, to get the time, delivery time right, so it doesn't affect the program, and also cost. Yep. So we're definitely and clearly looking at strategies, and that's one of the key ones.
And are there instances where the contractor needs to provide materials and maybe rely on council for guarantors or financing or funding at all?
I'm aware we're looking at a number of options, and sometimes contractually it does come due to advance payments, and there's mechanisms under the contracts that we work through. So part of making advance payment, it's prescribed methodology about what security we've got about those materials. So we need to be really careful about making advance payments on materials, because we don't know the ongoing stability of the supply chain, I guess. So we do need to be really careful, but there's contractual issues to work through with that.
And none of that falls outside of our current guidelines?
Not at the moment. I think if there was a great opportunity that fell sort of way outside the normal contractual provisions, it might be something that would bring to council for some guidance on, in terms of it's all about risk and what sort of level of risk do we want to take for a potential reward or a potential loss, I guess. So at the moment, nothing, I don't think, meets the threshold of coming back to council to seek the guidance or approval of council.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Maxine. I don't see any questions on Zoom. I've got a couple of questions that I'll just add in just to wrap this up. And following on from Councillor Ewan's question, and this may also be to Chris, for the purposes of the February annual plan discussion, will you be giving us an indicator of any reprioritisation of contracts on the basis of your assessment of the certainty that we will be able to complete them in the current environment, and that is around the availability of materials and labour resource, and suggesting to us that maybe there might be an opportunity to bring certain other projects forward that we can deliver and defer those and not even start those where the chances of the probability of being able to complete is almost zero.
A good question. I'd have to just take that one away and talk to the team. It's a good point. Just to make a point, like I could be corrected by Chris up there, but we're not at the moment seeing that we can't complete the projects that we've planned to do. So we've still got a competitive sort of supply chain out there that's tendering the work. So we're not seeing projects that we just can't complete because of the shortage. It's more about our crystal ball and, what's going to happen between now and the next 6 months. That's the tricky bit at the moment. But I think we're still seeing good, the library contract we brought to you recently, we had some good players competing for that project. You will recall we came to you with material escalation, COVID-related escalation issues, and sought more budget before we committed to that contract. So that's more likely to be our approach. I think come to you before we commit contracts to say we've had a good look at this and we think this is the risk and we need to increase the budgets to deal with this escalation, so you can be involved and make that decision and own that risk. But I'll take your point away. I think it's probably something, David, for us and through Tracy to consider as we're working up to February. And I think by, look, it's a really quickly moving thing at the moment, so even a couple of weeks can provide a lot of information in terms of what's happening. Yep. The other thing, sorry to blather on, but probably the issue I missed in relation to Councillor Maxine's question too is, and you see this playing out in the media, is alternative materials supplies. So we're getting a lot of requests now for contractors to use alternative materials other than our specified materials. So I think that would be a really big issue for Blair and Corey and his building control team. But also it's a big issue for us, and we are aware of our contractors with and without permission at the moment just substituting materials because they can't get the same materials. So I think we do need to have a bit of pragmatism around that in this world, but the quality of the alternative materials is something we've really got to look at. Our preference is that they come and talk to us and we knowingly together make those decisions, but we're aware of some just happening at the moment, and I think it's an industry-wide risk at the moment, and a big one for us if you think about the leaky buildings, I guess, and what can happen if you make, particularly in building control, the wrong decisions at this point in time. So I know Corey's right onto that.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Don't see any further questions, so that being the case, I'll move my chair's report. I have a seconder, Maxine, Councillor Maxine, and is there any debate on the report? Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. First of all, can I thank you and Maxine for the good work you're doing, and I like how in your chair's report you provide a constructive narrative, and I think we as an elected member group need to be thankful that we have yourself and Maxine and our talented staff providing this information, because it's a great management tool. I think, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think we're sailing into what I think will be a perfect storm. And I think we need to be mindful that Omicron is simply yet another phase. And if it isn't a COVID of some iteration, it will be something else. And I think I'm just mindful of the 380 million, including deferrals, that we were supposed to be doing in the first year of the LTP. And even at sort of 6 or 7% inflation, we're going to struggle to fund that. But more importantly and more concerning for me is that our growth strategy is underpinned by market expectation driven by the private sector. And my fear is, unlike council, who can always rely on the ratepayer to fill the gap, that the private sector themselves may find meeting those inflationary challenges will be harder. So we're working hard to put infrastructure in, borrowing more to enable it, to enable the private sector to do their growth, and we run the chance that they run into some significant problems. And we've invested all this infrastructure, and then we don't get the growth revenue we had projected. And that's what worries me and keeps me awake at night. So, you know, I'm just really mindful that we have to be cautious going in to the annual plan round, that this pandemic is not just a 1 year or a 2 year. It's going to have significant effect on us over the next, I think, 5 years, maybe more. I think the fact we're going to have to keep the border restricted for a prolonged period, so our labour is going to be hard, but material is going to be hard. So we know what's coming. I am hopeful because we've got talented people in this council. It will come down to governance that we show the discipline to make critical decisions in how we spend. And on that note, have a Merry Christmas.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair Rob. I'm really going to say pretty much exactly the same as Ewan did, but not as well. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Rob. I know I often tease you and call you things like Gorse Pockets and Grinch and Scrooge and etc. But like Ewan said, I appreciate the focus you're putting on this as we go into this this next year, and I'm really grateful for you in that position. And I also have seen that you do have an enormous community heart as well, unlike previous chairs that we've had in that seat. So there's hope for us all yet. So I'm glad you're here. It's always a balance, isn't it, with our 10-year plan projects. We're at this awkward time of our term, sort of in the middle of our term. We make all these huge project promises. We get the stuff across the line, and then things change. Then, of course, we want more. Add to that the costs thrust upon us by central government as we dance to their tune, restructuring and the enormous amount of money we're spending on those exercises. That won't come cheap. But we keep adding stuff, as does our community, and reasonably so. Like the cemetery lawn, for example, is a cost-bearing project that's going to be coming our way. We didn't see it happening. We can't predict everything at that time. Fences around Waiwhakariki, interns we're talking about just today. This reactionary stuff is going to cost money. So it's always going to be a balance, and I'm ready for that in the 10-year plan. This might just be the very first annual plan that I've actually sat through, and about 5 or 6 of these things we were actually saying to our community, really sorry, we know we wanted to do this, but we may have to push this back this time. And, you know, I'm ready for that. We just can't afford it. And I believe the community, like the households, will understand. However, I am encouraged by the fact we are looking at our external funding reviews really seriously at the moment, and our relationships with our businesses and suppliers, and I firmly believe this is a time to actually ask our suppliers for a little bit less, for a little bit more, to also get involved in sponsoring some of our community infrastructure in particular. I think we should be asking a little bit more of these guys because we pay them good money for what they do. And we have some really philanthropic and community-minded suppliers who would do stuff if we just ask. So I'm really happy to see that work getting underway at the moment. So there may be just another little income stream coming in. But I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Rob and Maxine and David and your team a very Merry Christmas and thanks for what you're doing.
Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you. And I liken this report to possibly the notion of the canary in the coal mine, but now I'm chair of the Environment Committee. I've got to go to Councillor Sarah for a more environmental friendly analogy. Perhaps a more analogy would be a weather forecaster, where you're reminding us that we're in very uncertain, stormy, inclement weather financially, and we have some very tough and challenging situation ahead of us, just as central government does, just as the private sector does, and not-for-profit, etc. I just wanted to compliment you and also your deputy on the intellectual precision and focus you bring to this portfolio, and I think this is a particularly good report, and I hope we can actually further discuss the tenets when we have, dare I say it, this group thing we're having at the beginning of next year, and I'm going to say an election year, and I'll say this being around for a long time, your election campaigns will start next year. Some of that will be good for positive democracy, some perhaps not, but hang together when it comes to our annual plan, or feel free to hang very separately. And why I say that is I think if ever there's a time to keep a collegial spirit and to have dialogue and genuine interaction, we can agree to differ, this is the year. And I think that's really what you've also alluded to, that we've got some stormy times ahead. And irrespective of an election later in the year, we've got to continue to work as a cohesive team around this area. So compliments to you, Councillor Rob and Maxine, for the great. I think this is a good report. This is going to be some sober New Year reading, particularly the Bill report, and also to the GM and your team. Thank you very much for again that intellectual integrity, intellectual precision you bring, and also telling us some of the stuff that we may not want as bedtime reading, but we definitely need it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Thank you for those comments. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. I haven't quite got down from my ninth floor office into chamber. I was meaning to, but I'll be there shortly. I wasn't going to say anything, but I just want to get in behind some of the comments of my colleagues. In fact, most of the comments. Thank you, Rob and Maxine, for the work you've done in this committee, because we've extended out into new areas of commission, such as procurement. And as my colleagues have said, Rob, you always keep us honest about the conversation about money, because at the end of the day, we can do nothing without either getting that money from the ratepayers, developers or government. There's not very much, and a little bit from fees and services. It'll be interesting as we go into the annual plan this time, as Councillor Mark has alluded to, because we will have, like most businesses, had some loss of income, loss of revenue, and we also have some increasing costs. If you look at some of the projects that we're involved in, I was intrigued recently to hear from someone in the community that the price of asphalt has gone up 20%, for example. Well, we do a lot of roads, so you can expect that to come down in the contract price. We are going to have to sharpen our pencil about what we do. We are going to have to work smarter and harder. At the same time, we're going to have to give the public a very difficult message, which is we do still need to grow the city. We do still need to provide affordable housing. We do, unfortunately, need to respond to the government directives for higher standards around various things, including the 3 waters, and we have to respond. And the housing bill is another example of how we have to respond. and everything that we do comes with some money. I just very much hope that at the end of the day, when it comes to the annual plan, well, it is an annual plan, not a long-term plan, so basically it's adjustments, not a whole-scale change of direction. But we do look very carefully at the costs we can cut, but they should not all come from the social and community infrastructure. That's my concern. So we do not, yes, Mark Bunting, I see you. I'm with you in one mind on this. We can't just save money by deciding not to renew the playgrounds, not to build, to do up our community centres and other amazing facilities that actually make the city a livable one. But yeah, thank you very much to the team for getting us through COVID and these times so far, and the times are still uncertain. And I think, as we have heard through Risk and Audit Committee, Rob, that there are still some substantial risks ahead of us in getting through this. But a great job this year. Thank you very much. I look forward to your guidance and the team's guidance, David and staff, for the annual plan, and as we face next year, which will not be a difficult year. Totally endorse Martin's comments around we have done very well as a team, despite our diverse views, to be a professional board and deliver on behalf of the public in a polite, respectful and professional way, and I do hope that next year we can continue to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. I'm not seeing any further debaters on the... sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Maxine. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Look, I couldn't let this last Chair's report for the year go by without a hearty thank you from myself, also to the Chair, for your leadership of this committee and reliability. We can always rely on Rob to bring us back into reality, and that's something that I admire about you. I don't always vote the same way, but certainly it's useful to be able to have that steadfast and reliability that you bring. I also reflect on a comment that the GM made earlier today about the challenges that we have, but not simply challenges, but opportunities that they provide us. And rather than going into 2022 with doom and gloom, I'll be bringing my optimism and asking for all of our staff to present us with the very best opportunities that we can respond to in such times, and look forward to that, the chance to take up those opportunities through our annual plan review. So thank you for that. A very Merry Christmas to everyone, and a great thanks to David, Tracy, Ian and others in the team. Thank you.
No further debaters? Oh, yeah, Councillor Mark, sorry.
Just going to throw my 2 cents worth in for here as well. Yeah, I got them.
Oh, they are too.
Yeah, little 2-cent coins. Firstly, I'll compliment you on the report as well, and back up what everyone else has been saying about yourself and Maxine and the team, David. It's nice to be part of this, and coming from a business background, I know that we always used to talk about the accounts department being and you would have heard this before, the bean counters, and then you have the what we consider the cool dudes over in marketing being the arts and crafts to get to do all the really neat stuff. But we need balance in any team, and I can see that quite clearly here. So it's reassuring to see it. Not so great when you see the numbers and then hear Ewan talk about the storm coming, which I agree. I think we're going to sail into something pretty tumultuous, but with good leadership and governance, we can navigate our way through that. The other thing I would say is that we are going to have to deliver a not such a great message to our stakeholders, being the ratepayers and whatnot. But if we deliver, if our messaging comes across right, then we will build a value proposition that they will buy into. And one thing I can see, having being the new guy in the team and having witnessed coming in prior to coming into council, is sometimes we don't quite get that right. And if we use this collegial team effort that Martin talks about, then we can deliver that proposition, and I think that'll be key to us really setting the bar for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. I'll come now to my right of reply if there are no further speakers in the debate. And I won't dwell on thanking those same people that everyone else has, but I will thank you for thanking us, and also acknowledge the hard work that our finance team do. We have got some very skilled and some very dedicated people on staff who do respond and who do hold our hands through some of the myriad of complex accounting that arises from the limitless number of activities that we seem to be involved in. But I did get a sort of a nerve when, and of course one of the things that really concerns me is we have a very large committed capital program, and I think we all agreed that we needed that for a growing city. And I think Councillor Ewan touched on a very pertinent point when he said that the private sector, who we are providing a lot of our infrastructure for, ultimately have the ability to stop when they think it's appropriate to stop for financial or other reasons, and leave us high and dry with a whole bunch of infrastructure that we've funded with ratepayers' money and no revenue coming back from that investment. And if you think back to the start of the GFC, and some of my colleagues were on council then, you will know that we kind of got left a little bit high and dry then with significant infrastructure and no activity happening around the city to actually capitalise on that. And that kind of storm that we're heading towards may, in fact, various economists are talking about some slowdown in the building sector, although we're not seeing that happen with prices at the moment. So somehow we need to be very nimble, and that was part of my question to Chris a little earlier about the ability to reprioritise particular projects that we may not be able to deliver on, or we may sense that the sector that we're providing that investment for may not be ready to respond, that we need to be able to move, and I know it's easier said than done, major capital projects around to suit where the city is headed. So nimbleness is going to be very important, and I'd like to see some of that flexibility, that nimbleness being reflected in some of the options that we have around the annual plan. If I can say something negative, I guess there's one little worry that, only 6 months ago we developed a long-term plan which showed a $2.9 million deficit this year, and if we look at Tracy's report a little later, we'll see that's now ballooned out to about $7 million. So we really need to be watching our pennies and our spend as we move into this next annual plan. But thank you for your kind comments, and again, a Merry Christmas to everybody. All right, so we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour of receiving the report, raise your hands.
Motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. All right, let's move on now to item number 7, which is the capital portfolio monitoring report, and welcome Ian Anderson to the table to present his report. Good morning, Ian.
Good morning, Councillor Rob. Good morning, councillors. Just before I start, I just would take the opportunity, Councillor Maxine, you asked a question earlier in the Chair's report about the internship thing. I thought Council might be interested to know that we ran a very successful graduate recruitment program late October, early November of this year, and certainly from a development group and infrastructure operations point of view, we were able to secure initially 4 graduates. Unfortunately, that has now dropped down to 2 due to 2 pulling out. But I mean, The good news for us, it was a hugely rewarding exercise for us, and we've just got two really top-notch graduates, one from Waikato Polytech across the road and one coming out from Canterbury University, who's coming with an environmental engineering background. So they'll be starting with us in late February of 2022. So it's been good. Hey, look, I'm going to present the capital monitoring report for the 4 months ended 31st of October, which is 1/3 through the financial year. Some of the issues I'll talk about today have had quite a reasonable debate through the last item on the Chair's report, particularly around the cost escalation and that. So I apologise if there is a little bit of repetition, and I'll try and keep it brief and that. The first point I'll make note is that after the four months of the year, we've spent our capital spend for the year is 72.7 million, and that comes with associated capital revenue of 22.4 million. And as you've heard a couple of times throughout the meeting, that's against an annual total estimated spend at this point of 380 million. I will just pause at that point to say, I think in the last meeting there was some discussion around capital revenue and exactly what was the makeup of that and what were the components. I added a section 23 into the report just to give you a little bit more detail around that. Really, capital revenue falls into two general categories: NZTA subsidy, Wakatahi subsidy, I think we're all very, very familiar with, and then what we call other revenue. And I've given you some real live examples of what other revenue may be, while it may be something as stock standard as contributions towards connections to our network, to our pipe networks. Equally, we see some substantial revenue streams coming through the organisation from like the Three Water stimulus money that the government's given us this year. We've also got some quite substantial multi-party funding agreements at the moment, particularly like with Ruakura, where we're partnered with Tainui Group and with the government to contribute towards that project. And those revenue streams show in that item. So when I say 22.4 million of external revenue or capital revenue, that's the type of thing we're talking about, okay? We would normally at this time of the year be starting to identify deferrals for the coming year. We've deliberately chosen not to start to specifically identify deferrals at this point, given that we're moving into an annual plan debate. So what we have done is we've looked at the program for the year, and we've made an assessment of what we think the annual level of deferrals will be at this year in terms of what will be the value of the projects that we will be asking for that money to be moved out into the future. Why did we do that? That was quite deliberate, because we wanted to be able to go into the annual plan and be able to give the people who are doing the financial strategy modelling some certainty around what those deferral levels are going to look like. And for that modelling purpose, you don't need to understand what happening at a specific project level. And when we did that, we certainly took into account the current environment in terms of where we are with COVID, what's happening with the NLTP program funding, to be able to give you that number. That number at this point has been assessed at 90 million. So if you were to use simple maths, you'd say the 380 program I've just talked about, if you were to reduce that by 90, you'd be looking at delivering a 290 program for this year. Clearly, we are in a very dynamic and changeable world, and look, we'll keep refining that as we move through, and obviously with the next annual plan workshop being February 17, any change to that will be brought forward at that point. But today, that's the number that we have determined that to be. If I just move forward to work in progress. Again, it's always an interesting topic, work in progress, and for this report, work in progress remains very high at just shy of 500 million. Again, the talking point number there really is the level of work in progress, which we are saying is in service but not yet capitalised, and you'll note that that number has increased to 125 million. I think we reported about mid-50s last report. The reason for that is twofold. Yes, look, we have had some significant projects that have moved out of work in progress into capitalisation, and the two I'm thinking about specifically there are the Western Interceptor at 17 million and the Rotokauri Transport Hub at 23 million. but equally you'll have heard me speak in previous meetings about the need to stand up a cross-organisational workforce, task force we've called it, or working group, to look at WIP as a collective and understand what's actually driving the blockages and why we're not moving quicker. Part of that exercise is we've gone back and we've had a look at all our work in progress that's currently in our database and looking at what's actually in progress, what actually is capitalised and in service, and that's, and the result of that review of the data has pushed that number upwards, and that's why we're seeing 125, an increase from the previous report. I really want to stress this point, and I try and stress at most meetings. Look, the impact of that capitalisation is the potential to understate your depreciation and therefore to understate your profit or loss position for the period, but we do make an assessment of what that value of depreciation is on that WIP, and that it comes through the financials and it is reflected in the report that Tracy presents in the next item. I will just tangent a little bit to say you might note then that in Tracy's report, depreciation is tracking unfavourable for the year. I do want to stress that that is not a result of work in progress or the level of the capital program. That is really being driven by the revaluation of the assets. So that's the assets being revalued upwards. Our same asset database costs more, therefore the depreciation expense moves up. And Tracy can talk more about that in the next item. The last item really is this. Look, I cover, there's 3 portfolio risks in there that were raised at the previous meetings, and I'll just go over this quickly. The first one was cost escalation. What I want to stress here is we've had 2 reports received in council from Burl in respect to this issue. One was one that we commissioned, HCC, and the other one is their national report that they send out, and it's that second report that Councillor Rob has attached to his chair's report. Both reports, pleasingly, were very consistent in their messaging. And the messaging was a little bit of an eyebrow-raising moment initially because outside of this current financial year, and I know there was some debate earlier about it running at possibly as high as 6% this year on the general CPI, all the indicators, long-term indicators, as the rates we've used in the LTP look like they are holding stable across the remaining 9 years. And that's then taking into account clearly a lot of factors. And I would ask you, if you do have the time to read that report, there's a lot of detail in there, but it does set out the rationale as to why they've arrived at those assumptions. But you'll see inflation running over years, LTP years over years, 9 through 2 through 10 are remaining very constant with what we allowed for in the LTP. So quite an interesting space in terms of understanding that professional advice versus what we might be seeing anecdotally, or we might be seeing through the media, or we might be seeing through talking to the industry. So I just thought I'd raise that. As a result of that, the current advice would be, as we move into an annual plan session, the workshop in February, the intent at the moment was to make a recommendation to council that we don't put any significant increases over the capital program to acknowledge that, and rather we take a monitoring situation of looking to see what's actually happening based on actual prices as they come through the tender box, so to speak. Having said that, I will alert you to 3 real examples. The first one is we've already had a report through council where the costs for the Rototuna Library were increased by $600,000 off the back end of increased cost escalation. Now, that increase has already been reflected and it's been approved and reflected in the financial strategy. The other 2, Chris Allen alerted to them when he spoke earlier, 2 roading projects. One's Wairiri Drive, that's the interchange project. There's a cost increase there that will be dealt with specifically in the COVID report that Chris Barton will talk to in the PX section. And just to be clear there's 2 costs coming to bear there. You'll hear from Chris later on this afternoon or later on this meeting. One is costs associated with cost escalation, and others to do with the actual cost due to the shutdown of the level 4 when the sites were closed. So there's 2 elements coming into play there. That will be dealt with today because those cost implications will affect this year's financial result. The third one is by far the most significant given the sheer quantum of the contract, is the Peacocks Bridge. That's a year 3, likely to be a year 3 cost as opposed to a year 2 cost. And again, there'll be some dialogue and some discussion about that in that COVID report. But again, that'll come back through the annual plan process, and Council will have an opportunity to consider that and debate that at that point as to the impacts on the financial strategy. And particularly with that one, and much with the Wairia Drive one, it should be noted that while those cost escalations you'll hear are gross, there will be associated co-funding with those. So we are it's highly likely we will receive the associated NZTA subsidy on both of those projects, which takes some of the sting out of the tail for HCC. Just the last thing really is just to conclude on the other two portfolio risks, which is NLTP. A report was at Infrastructure Ops early December on that, and some resolutions were made. Equally, there was some of the projects were delayed and will be considered as part of our annual plan debate. And then there's obviously the COVID report I've just been speaking to. So there's those costs as well. Again, I just wanted to make clear that those financial impacts of those things are not reflected in the financial strategy results you'll see when Tracy presents her report in the next item. Once we get certainty about what we're doing with those will be reflected in the next Finance Committee report, being the 10th of February, which will be a good link in as you move into that annual plan workshop on the 17th, so that you've got accurate and up-to-date information is exactly what is happening with the financial position for going forward. And I will stop talking.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the detailed report, and I think you've responded to a number of the queries that I identified in my read. So, Councillor Ewan, you're first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rob. Look, thanks for your narrative. My first question is, currently, what inflationary rate is reflected in what's come through the tender box so far?
So, look, I'm the accountant, so you have to excuse me. So the only one we've seen so far coming through is the Rototuna Library, and that came to the council meeting, and we quantified the impact of that in terms of the budget as an increase of 600,000. The other two contracts I mentioned, Councillor Ewan, was two roading projects. Now, they've got they're long-term, multi-year projects, and there's really clauses within those that allow the contractor to claim inflationary prices based on the roading index, the Waka Kotahi roading index, which again runs something different. So that's where we're seeing, we're going back to factual based, and that's what the claims are. But you know, we're not seeing at this point. We haven't got any of the tangible evidence to put in front of you to say that these cost increases are coming.
All right. Currently, we're using 4.9 over the LTP for inflation.
So, to quote numbers, this year and the current financial year, the LTP had a 3.4% increase on it.
4.9 is the rate increase.
Yeah.
Is the rates increase, I think, Ewan.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I don't have those tables in front.
But separately to that, my understanding is that the LTP does build an inflation rate.
Correct.
And that inflation rate is generally, you seek advice from Burl on that?
Yes, so again, just to reiterate, so what's in the LTP comes from Burl as well, and they provide information to the local government. And if you recall, they presented 3 scenarios to us, or to the country, in terms of what you might apply, because at that point COVID was very much real as well. And we actually chose the level 3 scenario, which was the faster, they called it the faster build scenario under COVID for the capital program. And so I think off the top of my head, the year 1 inflation factor was sitting at about 3.3 or 3.4%.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I apologise for my mistake of 4.9. So 3.3. That's what we're currently in the first year of the LTP that we had planned for.
Correct.
And what you're saying is currently you can't give me an indication if we're simply going to measure on the tender box analysis whether or not the 3.3 is fit for purpose?
No, I'm not. So what I'm saying to you is that the impact on this year's budget, because the budget's already set, is it's the 3.3, and if we were to get a price that was to come in, that was to exceed budget expectation and to be able to deliver the project within the budget that's been approved, we would need to come back through this committee, make you aware of that, and then ask for approval to increase the budget sum if required, so it could be reflected in the financial strategy.
I have no difficulty in understanding the consequence of an addition of escalation and how that process is managed. That's not the point of my question.
Sorry.
My point of the question is, you said that currently your advice going into the annual plan would be not to increase the level of inflationary quantum other than what's already been planned for, right? And I'm wanting to test that. Okay, so that's the purpose of my question. Rough calculation, in light of the fact that we're deferring the 90 million, in theory we're going to spend 290 million ideally in capital projects in the first year of the LTP. Is that correct?
Correct. That's the year we're currently in.
Okay, excellent. And what you're saying is, in the model, we calculated 3.3% inflation. You're saying, despite what Burl is now saying in one of its reports, which has sort of indicated, according to the Chair's report, about 6%, that you still feel the 3.3 is the appropriate?
No.
Okay,
no,
good.
Just
so what have I misunderstood?
So just for clarity,
yep.
Going forward for year 2, for next year and the years beyond, the Bill reports that we've received, both the Council commissioned one and the general national-wide released one, are both indicating the inflation rates that we used in the original LTP remain valid. Okay? So
which is what? The 3.3?
Yeah, on average, and I don't have the table in front of me, Councillor Wilson, but they remain reasonably same. So they're not saying, when what we're not seeing is they're not predicting go next year and beyond a significant uptake in inflation rates going forward. In fact, they're saying they said it should come down from this year and it should plateau back to where we thought it was previously. So the issue then becomes, what are we doing with the current financial year? And the current financial year is running at, if you want to, I think it's 4.9 if you look at the September quarter. There's other numbers to say it could run as high as 6 for the end of the year. The question is then, what does that inflationary impact have on this current financial year in terms of the pricing we're getting in? And what we're saying is that to date we've had one contract being the Rotorua Library, which has come in, and we've had to request a further 600,000. The other 2 contracts are both in the roading space, those multi-year projects, where we're running off specific contract requirements to look at the transportation indices. But what we're saying right now is I can't give you any other examples of real examples today to say that, hey, these projects and these contracts are going to exceed budget. So it's for this financial year.
Okay. Tell me, in a worst-case scenario, if inflationary pressures were to escalate for the next financial year, from the 3.3 that we had projected, I think I just heard you say that there's a suggestion that currently there was the 4.9.
That's what it's currently running annually.
Right, okay. So 4.9 currently. You're saying that the projections are that it's going to go down back to roughly the 3.3?
To be clear, that's the advice we have received from Bill.
Look, okay, that's fine. Tell me what happens if, in fact, it doesn't go down and it goes up to 6%.
That would be worst case scenario. That would put considerable financial pressure on your financial strategy to deliver the current program.
Okay, thank you. So give me some meaningful quantums. What does that mean in actual dollars that we would have to allocate to cover the difference?
Well, I mean, without being overly simplistic, Councillor Wilson.
Oh, I love simple.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if you were delivering a $300 million capital program and it moved by 5% above what we thought over and above, that would be a 15 million. You'd be looking to for 15 million. What you'd also then have to consider is, was there any associated revenue with that? But in simple terms, that would be the quantum.
All right, great. In light of the 290 million that we know, unless I've got this wrong, 290 million is what you're now suggesting we are likely to spend in the next year?
That's our current assessment.
Wonderful. And you're saying that currently the only warnings we've had are two projects that General Manager Chris have indicated. We know the 600,000 from the library has already hit us. Just remind me, Chris, have we had any indication what potentially those two contracts that you're aware of in terms of quantum? Escalation.
Yep. You'll, in the COVID report today, you'll see that quantified for Cobham Wairere.
Just remind me.
That's in the PX section, but it's in the. But I think it's in the order of about 2 million, in the order of 2 million. The Peacocks one, that will be coming as part of the annual plan, but the number there could be in the order of $15 million. And in addition to some of the COVID lockdown expenses. So, that, and that's purely driven by the formula, that the contractual requirement to pay, driven by a formula and plugging in the cost indices.
So you can understand, and the purpose of my question is to try to get into a governance headspace.
Can I try and anticipate your question? I think some of the questions you're asking are really good, and they're for us to consider as the annual plan and what we do in those assumptions. So we haven't finished that thinking as a team yet. So this conversation is really good, because it'll just fire us up and reinforce us to come to you in February with some recommendations around that. I think in Ian's report, what we're suggesting for this financial year is not to react to go and increase budgets because of the inflationary pressure. It's to respond on a contract by contract or project by project basis. Like, we've got a lot of contracts running now where all these pressures are on, but we see the risk is largely sitting with the contractor, and it's just managing that risk tightly and holding the contractors to account. So if they're short-term contracts, normally that risk will then sit with the contract. If they're long-term contracts, you go down the formula approach where the client takes the risk based on formulas. So just like the library contract, if we've got more contracts coming up, like we just have an estimate in the budget, and we try and guess as best as we can what the market price is going to be. So there's so many variables in that. It's not, if we were to come and say just add 5% to our whole portfolio this year, that'll probably just increase our deferrals by the end of the year. We're better off to come to you on a project by project basis as we're letting contracts to tell you what the result is. Now, we could come back and say, well, our budget happens to be sufficient, we can fit it within the budget we allowed, we don't need any more money. Or like the library, we can come back and say, well, we do need a bit more. Yeah. So that's how we're proposing to manage this financial year.
Yeah.
Next financial year is a really valid and good annual plan discussion of how we treat that risk. And I think Ian said at the beginning it was an eye-raising moment for us to see that bill report, because it just didn't seem to fit. And I think my analysis of that is the bill report is looking ahead from 2 to 10 years, and it's not really capturing what's happening right here and right now, and what does the inflationary pressure have now in terms of lifting the whole base cost Yeah, so we do. There's some serious thinking going on at the moment between the finance team and ourselves, and what we recommend.
So, all right. So, from a governance strategy, our staff's recommendation is we continue in this current year being reactive. So, when there is a inflationary pressure on a specific project, we react. We approve the additional quantum. So far, correct me if I'm wrong, we know 600-odd thousand, and I think I've understood potentially 17 million on the other two.
And
the larger one can be dealt with. The larger one can be dealt with through the annual plan and making sure we've got our base right moving forward.
Right, because then that helps us understand where we're starting from. But that 17 in theory would be spent in this current year.
No, just 100% clarity that the Wairere Drive one will be spent this year, and the 2 million you heard, which will be dealt with in PX, that's the gross cost. There's highly likely to be NZTA subsidy on that. We'll reduce that by about 50%.
74%.
74%, Chris is right. The remaining 15 is likely to be a year 3 LTP cost. So when that,
Okay, that's helpful. And so what you're saying is we're going to act retrospectively and approve in this current year, but as we set the LTP, we're going to currently, what I'm trying to challenge is your suggestion that we continue to adopt the inflationary rate of whatever that is in the LTP, rather than amend it to reflect what we currently are seeing. And so that's what I'm trying to challenge. I'm hoping that as we go into the LTP, we will have learnt from the current trading environment, and that we would use that to determine the likely inflation going forward in the next year, rather than the suggested 3.3. Because my point would be, what we've already heard is way above what we had projected for this year. Or am I wrong? Are we, with the known prices that we're now seeing, are you saying that we're within the inflationary quantum that you had projected? You know, I mean, it's 17.5 million, although I accept that some of the 15 million is pushed out to year 3. 17 million is a lot of money. Is that in line with what you had projected in price escalation?
So I'll just reiterate so for the current year, we're budgeted 3.3. We're seeing evidence to suggest that rate may be higher. Maybe it may peak at 6, but that's general CPI. We really don't know, so we need to wait to see what the impact is that's coming through in terms of current pricing.
And is that based on the 17.5?
That's that. Well, I mean, see, what we're doing here is we're sort of mixing and matching here a little bit. As the 17's based on specific contract inflationary factors are sitting in 2 significant contracts, being Wairere and Peacocks. So we were talking about general CPI as it applies to the general portfolio budgeting. That's the way we do it, Councillor Wilson. What I'm saying to you is that if you look at what we have put into the budget last year during the LTP as the inflation rates on the capital program over the 10 years, and we look at the current advice we've received from Burl in 2 reports, that report that we've received just in the last month is suggesting that the rates we've allowed for in the LTP for year 2 onwards remain valid and remain appropriate. But that will be for council to consider during the workshop on the 17th of February.
So final question. Would you now, on reflection, being aware of the prices that you have just received, would it be fair to say that the first year of the LTP, we underestimated the rate of inflation? What you've just said is you're happy for year 2 and 3 because you're comforted by the Beale report, but in light of the fact that we're spending more money and it's more likely to be 6, am I correct that in the first year of the LTP we underestimated by potentially over 2% the rate of inflation?
Could I jump in, Councillor Wilson, and number one, just acknowledge the points you're making are the absolute key issues to talk about. As a team, we haven't landed on a position yet. We're still talking about it. Look, it's a really volatile situation, which is why we haven't landed on a position. So we've got the Beale report, but as I say, I think we need to land collectively with the CEO, the finance team and ourselves on what we need to do. But your points are well made and exactly the right debate that we want to have in February 17th with you, and what the assumptions are moving forward.
And if I can
Thanks,
jump
Chair.
in through the chair, I just want to reinforce the Finance Committee's role in terms of the 6-weekly review of the financial strategy and the things, given what Chris is talking about in terms of volatility of material prices and the program of work. The annual plan is very important, but also we have the Finance Committee to actually bring new information to it. So when we get to land the annual plan, we'll have our very best information and estimates to land that. But that's not the last time we review it, obviously, and it's probably good to know that on a 6-weekly cycle, we're bringing information to elected members to make sure that you have the most up-to-date view on what's going on out there. Certainly, Beale is a great platform to start with, but there are things that we are seeing that is over and above the currency of that report, and we need to bring that to elected members, so we'll be doing that.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. No further questions. So I'll move that we receive the report, which, let me go back to the agenda, is on page 47, that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Maxine. Is there any debate? Yes, there is. Councillor Mark Bunting.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, I will just say one thing as as someone who came in on a cycling ticket. It does break my heart a little bit that we just, for whatever reason it is, and none of our own, are falling behind in our biking and micromobility plans. But otherwise, looks great. I echo what Mayor Paula said earlier on too, that we are determined to look after what we've got in our community infrastructure. So I'm grateful that we're on target with a lot of that. Yeah, that's really all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Chair. Look, the purpose of my questioning today was meant purely to be constructive and to try to ensure that we don't blindly use inflationary figures or growth projection figures without constantly wanting to challenge them. I think we really do have to take as much dynamic data that we have and try to project forward on what our current growth and spend strategies are to give us a true figure. Like Councillor Mark, I'm concerned that some of the projects that we wanted to get done have been deferred. I'm doubly concerned about that, one, because we've rated for them and there's an expectation in the community. Second, that we've deferred them because we can't get it done, and by deferring them, we're likely to have to spend more money to eventually get them done, because the price that we were to pay for them by the time we actually do implement them will have escalated. So I look forward to the meaningful discussion we have going into the LTP. I accept the information we've been provided, albeit I'm mindful that as we start getting the tender prices in for some of the projects, I think it's fair to say that we have underestimated inflationary effects. I'm not placing any blame for that. We're living in a very dynamic and fluid environment. I'm simply asking that once we know, we reflect that in our future projections and that we react to it. It's not placing blame, it's a dynamic environment, but I'm encouraging us to be mindful and project that forward. That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. See no further debaters. Just a couple of quick comments, and to some extent responding and adding to Councillor Ewan's comments. I guess we are in a very fluid and unusual situation in the sense that it's always been believed that inflation predictors are always speculative. And where the risk for us at the moment is that we're moving away from many years of inflation, and I'm talking about CPI inflation, which has been around 1 to 2.5% each year. And the predictor that we've got for 2022 is 6%. So that's a major shift, and of course I accept that when we put together the long-term plan earlier this year, it was based on the best known information then, and we used Burl, who are a well-established and respected organisation, to check our figures to make sure that we did have indexes in the LTP that were reliable at that particular time. So hence my question with Chris a little earlier in the day about the need for us to be all over this in February. And I think the feedback, as Councillor Ewan has said, the feedback's going to be in some of the prices that we start to receive for the work that we're putting out into the marketplace. And it won't be just the big contracts. We should be able to get some feedback from some smaller jobs what that inflation predictor is actually doing in the marketplace in terms of pushing up prices where... My goodness. That's telling me that's telling me I think that I've said enough. So look, I'm really pleased with the work that we're doing here, and I think that there is a need. Maybe even though our LTP is only less than 6 months old, there will be a need for us to have a really good look at some of our pricing and as we move into this next form of the annual plan. And I think we've got to be open and visible with our ratepayers on this, because there will be some hurt out there that while the government's, while Burl are talking about 6% CPI, with our price index historically being higher than the CPI, many of those who are paying rates in the city will not have wage increases that will match those. So we need to have a good, hard and visible look at this as we move into the annual plan next year. No further debate. Okay, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand that we receive the report.
Motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, everybody. Now we move on to the report from Tracy on the financial performance and strategy report to 31st of October. Welcome, Tracy.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm here this morning to present to you the October 2021 results. So the accounting result year to date in October is reporting a favourable variance. Most of this, however, is due to the non-cash gain on the revaluation of our interest costs. Our balancing books result is also favourable. We're at $4 million ahead of budget at the moment. However, this is very much a timing. The main contributor at the moment is the operating and maintenance costs, which is largely in our transport area, and obviously over the shutdowns and things like that, our maintenance is slightly behind. However, we are anticipating that that will be fully spent by the time we get to the end of the financial year. You'll also see in personnel we're slightly favourable. Again, as I mentioned at the last committee meeting, we are still struggling to fill some of those roles that we had. Just in regards to our financial strategy, you'll see on paragraph 53, there's just one adjustment coming through from a council meeting already taken, so that's in our operating result. And you'll see, as again we've briefly talked about already this morning with our balancing the books ratio, we're now forecasting to be slightly worse off than what we had in the original budget. So this is taking into consideration the COVID costs that we currently are aware of, the loss of revenue that a couple of the teams are now sort of forecasting through, as well as the effects that Ian did mention earlier on the revaluation of our buildings and the additional depreciation that goes with that. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tracy. Looking for questions from elected members. No questions? All right, so we'll move to. Yeah, thank you.
I haven't got my thing in.
Oh, you're on the board.
I'm on seat. Yeah, I'll get it in a sec.
Okay. Yep. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Just in terms of the balancing books and the way that things are tracking, with revenue being down and other things, what difference does that make? How's that going to work with our target to balance the books by? Are we going to? Oh.
Do you want to answer that, Tracy?
Thank you.
Do you mean by year end, Mayor Paula?
I mean in the long term. In the long term plan scheme of things.
I'll get that. I'll get
Oh, seriously. And I haven't got a cup of tea either.
You having a good day, Mayor Paula?
Yeah.
Tracy, do you want me to answer that?
And for all the people watching this, I'm really sorry about that. Not
Christmas
it's
jolly.
Christmas, and we're trying to relax a little bit into it. No, I'm just on where we're hoping to balance the books in year 2025, wasn't it? In the LTP, right?
Yep.
Is it?
It's in the graphs on page.
Yeah. I just haven't got the graph right in front of me. What do you expect the current financial situation to do to that, or is that something we determine in the annual plan?
We'll say that we're already forecasting what that balancing of books is. So I think it's on attachment 1. You'll see what we've got there is the annual approved budget of the $3.5 million in deficit. What I'm saying now is we're forecasting that will be $5.7 million in deficit.
Right.
So the difference is about $2 million. Most of that is coming through because of the revaluation that we did on our buildings earlier on in the year. So you'll remember when we did that, obviously we budget to do and have that increase in the revaluation or the depreciation effect of that revaluation. Those buildings came through a lot higher than what we'd anticipated. So obviously what we're doing now is essentially taking more depreciation. So most of that variance that we're bringing through is because of that. There is also a little bit around the loss of revenue that we'll see through on those extra COVID costs as well. So we'll get more of a feel of that probably in the next report that I'll bring to you on the February meeting, as we'll go through obviously summer. So you remember last year we ended up doing quite well in a lot of our visitor destination areas over the summertime. However, the team are still predicting that it's not going to be as good as what we potentially hoped for. So hopefully by the time we get to February, March next year, we'll have a bit more of an idea of how that's played out.
Thank you for answering my clumsy question so well.
and let me just add, if you look at the graph on page 79, we're down less than 2 million on the balance in the book, so we will still balance the books in 2024 because like we said we would. And there could be upside, as Tracy says, in terms of the summer. Who knows with the new traffic light system and the visitors getting out. Auckland is coming down.
Remember, the balance in the books is kind of a year by year sort of effect. So just because we don't balance them this year doesn't really have an effect on again what we try and do for the following year. What what it does, so we would do, it does have an effect on our debt to revenue. Because obviously, if we don't balance our books, then to pay for that, it means that we go into debt. So that's where you'll see that more of the movement is in that.
That's fantastic.
That's
Thank
right.
you. That clarifies something in my mind. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Councillor Sarah.
Thanks, Rob. Tracy, I just have a question around the depreciation. So could you provide a bit more context around that? From the report says essentially buildings were revalued and then that's resulted in a higher depreciation. Was that just that property, what was the reason that they were valued higher than what we expected? Was it around the market or just interested in?
Yep, exactly that. So what we have to do is at the end of every year with all of our assets, we have to make sure that they're what they call fair values. And some of it is a combination of market, of what it is on market, and what those assets would be to replace. So because of the nature of Hamilton and the growing and the values, as you know, going up and up and up, we've had to do land and buildings for the last 3 years, every year. So our buildings is a combination of our strategic buildings that we have and also all of our facilities. We get an independent valuer that comes in and values those for us. And the value of what those buildings came out at compared to what we'd anticipated was a lot higher. And that was done at the 30th of June this year. So obviously the effect of the depreciation compared to when I'd done the budget 6 months earlier was quite different.
Right, but it's just the buildings rather than the land that we're looking at in terms of the value.
Yeah, we don't depreciate land. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I'm just interested in why it's so much higher than what we've expected for buildings.
Yeah. I mean, I just did the report, and that's really interesting. But yeah, there's some examples in some of our buildings that we had at the time. So.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I've got a couple of questions here, Tracy. The results are up to the end of October. Given that we were in lockdown for most of November, have you had a chance to look at the financials in the sense of what lost revenue we might have had during November and whether that impacts on the projected $5.7 million deficit that you would have done based on the October accounts? Would you want to review that in the context of that lost revenue?
Yes, I have reviewed that. And you'll remember that obviously we lost of revenue, but we also have lower costs in certain areas as well. So especially around the events type businesses, obviously if we're not getting revenue in, there is costs that are associated with it that we don't pay for at the same time. But it is still tracking along the same lines in the sense of unfavourable balancing the books by the time we get to year end.
So if we remain open, our activities remain open over the summer without any further lockdowns, that will be the test in terms of whether the public respond to using our facilities in an open sense, in the same way that they did last year, where there was a degree of buoyancy in terms of utilisation.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Can I just jump in there?
Sure.
Just talking to Helen Parkey, I think it's probably a good time of the year that things are reopening because, a lot of our facilities in the community area, we get a lot of revenue, are dependent on fine weather, apart from, say, the Waikato Museum, which quite often does better when the weather's hotter or wetter, because people go in there because it's air conditioning, or if it's raining, they take their kids there. There is some indications, talking to other councillors around New Zealand, there's a bit of a feeling, and it's crystal ball gazing around, a little bit of hesitancy with the traffic light system, but I think as we move today into our VAC certifications for our facilities, I think we should get a good indication over the next 4 or 5 weeks, Councillor Rob, and then early in the new year we should be able to give elected members a bit of a taste of what the summer's going to look like. We did bounce back very strongly last year, and in fact at the zoo we had some record numbers and record revenue as well over a 6-month period.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, Tracy, just in terms of the depreciation and the current deficit on budget or shortfall on budget, do you expect that will continue throughout the year? You know, I mean, you've obviously done this on a month-by-month basis for the 4 months. Will the remaining 8 months of depreciation on buildings at the revalued figure see that deficit continue and increase?
So if you look at the balance in the books forecast, I've already forecasted in the full year's work of that effect of that particular topic of revaluation on the buildings.
Okay.
So at the moment, I don't see it getting any worse in that particular space.
So the only area where it could get worse is once the outstanding work in progress has been capitalised. If there's any shortfall there, that could increase on what you've already.
We do as Ian mentioned earlier, so we do an accrual every month on projects that obviously aren't capitalised, but we know should be capitalised, so we catch up that depreciation.
Okay.
So the only other difference that would be is if, again, compared to budget, we obviously budget for so many projects to have been completed and put on the fixed asset register. If that's not as advanced as what we thought in the budget time, then that will make a difference. Or if we do more than what we've obviously anticipated during budget time, that makes a difference as well.
Okay, but historically we've generally been quite accurate with those estimates. Yeah, thank you. All right, no further questions. Oh yes, Councillor Maxine, I see your name on the board.
Thank you, and it just came out of the comment from our CE and Tracy with regard to the summer season and the bookings, etc., that we may have, forward bookings perhaps, and those larger events are likely to be the ones, I guess, where we, at the H3, where we might be able to bring back some of that revenue. Are you confident that we've got forward enough bookings to give us the opportunity, I guess, to make up that shortfall that we've seen earlier? Oh, and I see that Sean has popped up.
Yeah, Sean has appeared, yes, yeah. Good morning, Sean.
Yes, I think that question, Councillor Maxine, I think in very short term, we don't have the new booking profile that will make up for the lost revenue that we've had thus far this year. But certainly February, March, April onward, it's going to be very, very high. But I don't at this stage feel that we're going to necessarily replace that lost revenue or all of that lost revenue. One of the things we need to keep in mind is that many event organisers, not so much in the business event space, but when it comes to large concerts or even sports events, are actually taking a very, very conservative approach to setting in concrete their events moving forward. And most of them are actually looking really from July onwards next year before they lock down some of the things that they want to do. So part of our market is going to be pretty robust and give us a lot of revenue replacement. Other parts are not going to be as robust as we would like. So I would like to think, however, that our cost containment, which we've managed thus far, outside of depreciation, will help us overcome the loss of revenue.
And during the period this year, actually, during the lockdown this year, earlier, in the summer season of 21, we benefited from some of the loss of Auckland. And now that Auckland is entering into the orange traffic light on the 30th of December, might that impact on some of our potential?
I don't think we'll have a huge change beyond what we've got programmed in the system right now, because most people were anticipating being in orange earlier in the new year in any case. So the recent change won't have made a huge difference. But look, business events definitely will be very strong. Auckland will be reopened. Aucklanders will head out of town and come our way. They're probably more nervous about things being disrupted in Auckland than they are down here for business events, which does work in our favour. But as I said before, it swings around about. Some stuff is going to be really strong, some's going to be weak.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. That's
All right,
enough.
no further questions, so I will put the staff recommendation, which is on page 72, that we receive the report and that we approve the capital movements and the adjustments. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Is there any debate? No debate. All right, we'll go to a show of hands. Those in favour?
Motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, and I think this is an ideal time for a break, so let's break. It's 11:15, so let's resume at 11:30, please. Back to the meeting, please. We're now on item number 9, which is the office goods and stationery contract renewal. Tracy, you're ready and able there? Do you wish to say anything in regard to the report?
I could take the report as read and happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to second.
Okay, I've got a mover, Councillor Ewan, and a seconder, Mayor Paula.
Forum?
Of the public forum.
Right,
yes.
I'll leave that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any questions? There are no questions. Let's move to debate. Does anyone wish to speak in debate? All right, we'll move now to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand.
Motion carried unanimously.
Great, thank you.
Well done, Tracy.
Well done. Good report, Tracy. Okay, item number 10, welcome Julie. Item number 10 is the Chief Executive's cost savings report.
Sorry. So I'm presenting the report today. The report is for the year ended 30th of June 2021. It's for your information and no decision is required. So, I'll take the report as read.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No questions coming up. Just one question from me, Julie, and that is, in terms of going forward, what will be the reporting period, and how regular will the reports be made to this committee, and on what basis will they be quarterly?
We'd like to bring it quarterly. We're working currently on a new format that we'll talk to you about.
Okay, and that quarter will be the September, December, March quarters, rather than tying in with the reports that we get at this meeting. Yes. in other financial areas. Yeah, good. And there is progress being made on the format of the report?
Yes, there is.
Okay, good, good. All right, that's my questions.
So that'll be under those categories, under the little diagram under clause 18?
Yes, yep.
Yeah, cost avoidance, cost savings, revenue generation, additional value add.
Yep, under paragraph 18, yep. That was the outcome of the briefing that we had. Yep.
Correct, yep.
All right, I will move. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Paula, you got a question?
That's fine. Just a couple.
Sorry, it's not coming up on my screen here. So,
that's all right.
Okay.
I'll wave.
Please,
I'll wave
no. Please, you got a question? Yeah.
Yep, a couple of little ones. What are e-auctions?
So those are just online auctions, so rather than going through a full tender process, they tender online. So it's a different process but more efficient.
Oh, okay. So it's not. So it's just changing over from a manual.
Yeah, just
system.
changing the way we go about it.
All right, and that's the sustained amount. Is that the maximum amount you think you can save through?
That's our target, but we'll be going as much as we can.
So that was achieved. 50,000 was achieved.
Yep.
And it can be sustained, right? Thank you. The Chamber's digital rollout. Can you explain to me what that consisted of?
Sure. It was automated visual recording for chamber meetings. The savings include one-off implementation in year 1 and the ongoing savings from year 2.
All right. No, I've got you. So it's replacing the gentleman who used to sit it back and film us and do all that. Right, cool. And the last one is the smart space savings. Where would we just saving, because it's not being used, but where would we find the actual costs against the smart? Is that in the previous year when it was established, the smart space was set up?
Yeah, that used to sit in Sean Hickey's budget.
Pardon?
That used to sit in Sean Hickey's budget.
Okay, so it doesn't now?
It was not. we're not using that budget, and that's why it's was a saving.
Right. So that was a deliberate decision or just an accidental?
Part of the Smart City revamp in terms of how we go about that whole program.
Okay, so what did this, at some stage offline, maybe even someone could tell me what the smart space cost to implement and trial?
Yeah, and I think it relates to the, remember we had the smart space over in the library?
I know, I know where it is.
Yeah.
And I know it cost a fair bit to set up, and then it didn't meet our expectation, or we decided to do things differently.
So closing that down, it was ongoing.
But there would have been a cost originally. I just wanted to understand what the cost was versus establishment cost versus the savings cost that we're now not having it.
Yep, we can.
Does that make sense?
We can dig that out and send it via email.
Yep, thank you. Thanks.
There was external contributions to that too, which Richard had organised.
Yeah. It kind of just came and went, so we didn't really see that.
All right, everybody, I'm not seeing any... a question from Councillor Maxine.
Oh, just a little quickie, actually. Also, back in the 10-year plan, there was the possibility to introduce electronic communications of our rates to ratepayers. And whilst that didn't make the grade in terms of the vote, it's still a worthy idea to pursue and may fit well into future cost-saving consideration. Is that something that might come back through the annual plan for...
It's not currently proposed for the annual plan, so through the long-term plan we talked about how often we would invoice our ratepayers, and there were, I can't remember, I think we put up 6 monthly, but that didn't fly. We stayed with quarterly, but so that's currently where we're at. But at any time, if elected members want to revisit that, we can certainly bring back what we believe to be the cost savings. I can't remember what they were, Matt. Were they about 75,000 or something? Around that number? Yes. And that relates to mileage and printing.
We've had some really good uptake on email, so we've always offered email rates and voices. So we've increased that sort of last 12 months.
You might need to come up to the microphone. The Zoomers possibly won't be able to hear you.
Thank you.
Sorry. So we have had a really good uptake actually over the last 12 months. So we've always offered to email rates and voices. About the last 18 months ago, we were kind of sitting around about 25% of our ratepayers would receive their invoices by email. We're over 40% now of that. We've had a drive, we've had quite a campaign to push that. So we're really pleased with that number, but we'll continue to push that as much as we can.
And with the revamp of our website, is there further opportunities for us to grow that percentage? And
yes, yep. We are also working with our printing company just to see what opportunities there are in order to deliver our rates and voices. A little bit different from just the traditional post. Yep. But yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thanks Councillor Maxine. Councillor Mark Bunting.
Animal control process improvements. That's a sustained saving of 35, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So what did we do, and has our level of service been affected, or is it okay?
No, it hasn't. We put more into authority and had some re-engineering of processes, and we were actually able to reduce by half a staff member.
Oh, okay.
So 0.5.
Right, but we're still maintaining that level of service. Great, that's good news. And the drone purchase, I'm curious about that. Did we just not buy one? Or
No, I think we did purchase one and used our own drone rather than paying Becca for drone imaging.
Okay, cool. Thank you, that was just a curious one. I appreciate that. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you,
Chair. Sorry.
Councillor Mark. No further questions. Although this says it's information, there is a decision that needs to be made, and it is that we receive the report. Councillor Mark has moved. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Maxine. Does anyone wish... Thank you, Julie. Does anyone wish to speak in debate? No? Okay, we'll go by show of hands. Those in favour?
Motion carried unanimously.
Now I need a resolution to exclude the public. Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Have a seconder, please, Councillor Mark. Donovan. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Carried.